Ava Delaney stood in front of the whiteboard, hands shaking, heart racing, when the professor erased her proof without reading it. He looked her in the eye and said, "We don't check work that's obviously plagiarized." Her classmates laughed, not at the equation, at her skin. What they didn't know, that proof wasn't just hers, it was her mother's dying legacy. And tonight, she's going to expose everything. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. She walked into the classroom, and not a single head turned. Ava Delaney's footsteps were light, but her presence carried a quiet defiance as she stepped across the marble floors of Holcroft University. The lecture hall smelled faintly of polished wood, heritage, and 100 years of whispered assumptions. Rows of students murmured to each other, laughing in low, confident tones. A boy in a Harvard sweatshirt leaned back with the ease of someone who'd never had to prove he belonged. No one looked at her. Not really. Ava found an empty seat in the far left corner. She didn't try to draw attention. She didn't need to. Her skin did that for her. At Holcroft, she was the anomaly, the black girl with scholarship-tagged tuition, a suitcase passed down through 3 family generations, and textbooks she couldn't afford to mark up. While the other students bragged about spring programs in Europe and debated internships at Goldman, Ava quietly unzipped her backpack and pulled out a hand-me-down notebook, the edges soft from years of overuse. Inside, tucked behind the last page, was the only thing that truly mattered to her, a yellowed scrap of paper with her mother's handwriting. The equation wasn't just complex. It was, in every academic sense, unsolvable. Her mother, a failed PhD student from the early 2000s, had once told her, "No one will believe a black woman solved it first. But maybe they'll believe you." She hadn't lived long enough to see that belief unfold. And now, Ava sat in a whitewashed room filled with young adults whose last names appeared on donation plaques. The professor, Dr. Richard Holden, entered without acknowledging the room, thin-rimmed glasses, stiff tie, and skin like bleached linen. His voice echoed sharply across the room, but his eyes skimmed over Ava like she was air. "Welcome to Advanced Theoretical Mathematics," he began, tone clipped, British-tinged. "If you're here for extra credit, transfer out now. This course is not for dabblers." A few chuckled. Ava stayed silent, scribbling notes in the margins of her second-hand textbook. By the end of the lecture, her notebook was filled with annotations. Her mind was 5 steps ahead, but no one noticed. No one asked to see her notes. No one cared. That was day 1. By the 3rd week, the pattern had calcified into ritual. Students formed study pods. She wasn't asked to join any. Office hours turned awkward when she entered. Professors would glance at her paper and nod without comment, then give 10 minutes of feedback to the white student behind her. She ate alone, studied alone, walked campus with headphones in, and her shoulders tight from being watched but never acknowledged. One evening, she walked into a campus mixer, hopeful, stupidly hopeful, and overheard a girl whisper, "That's the janitor's daughter, right?" Followed by stifled laughter, and someone saying, "No way she got in on merit." They didn't even try to lower their voices. Her father, Marcus Delaney, had worked at Holcroft for 23 years. He cleaned the same floor as his daughter now walked, emptied trash from the faculty lounges that never welcomed her in. He had loved the university once, believed in its promise. He had told Ava, "You make it through Holcroft, baby, and doors'll open that you never knew existed." But now Ava understood something her father hadn't. Some doors weren't closed. They were built without knobs for people like her. Still, every night, when the noise faded and the buildings emptied, she returned to the math lab, the one room she could claim after hours without fear of judgment. There, on the far wall, stood an old unused chalkboard. Most preferred whiteboards and tablets now. But Ava liked chalk. She liked the way it bit into the surface, left a trail, a memory, and every night she worked on the same unsolvable equation. Her mother's. The formula danced across her mind like music, elusive, brilliant, and unfinished. Ava had memorized every curve, every variable, every dead end that stumped mathematicians for decades. But the solution felt close, just beyond reach. She had a ritual now. After her nightly session, she'd wipe down the chalkboard, pocket her notes, and disappear. Not out of fear, but protection. Some things weren't meant to be seen before they were finished. But one night, she forgot her eraser. It was nearly 11 p.m. The math lab was dimly lit, its overhead lights flickering in places. Ava was bent over the board, hair pulled into a messy bun, sweat lining her brow as she moved furiously from variable to variable. Chalk dust clung to her fingers. Her mind buzzed with alignment. Everything was clicking. She didn't hear the door open. Professor Halden had returned to grab a forgotten briefcase. He paused mid-step as he caught sight of the figure at the board. For a moment, he almost left, until his eyes narrowed on what was written. Lines of calculus flowed like poetry, probabilities interlinked, and in the corner a partial solution to a mathematical problem he'd once built his thesis around. His breath hitched. He stood frozen as Ava connected the final sequence. It took her seconds, maybe 40. Then she stepped back, blinking, as though not quite believing what she'd written. Professor Halden said nothing. He stepped back into the shadows, unseen. His face was unreadable, pale, tight-lipped, not but scared, because he had once declared in a lecture in a published paper on international stages that this equation was impossible, and a janitor's daughter had just solved it. The next morning, Ava received a message on her student portal. Professor Halden requests a private meeting. Urgent. When a black girl solves an equation in 40 seconds, the room doesn't clap, it stares. Ava Delaney didn't sleep that night. After receiving Professor Halden's summons, her body moved on autopilot, her limbs going through the motions, but her thoughts churning like a storm tide. Had he really seen what she'd written? Had he recognized it? And more importantly, what was he going to do with it? By sunrise, her name was already moving through campus. Whispers like static in the air. At first it was faint, a murmur in the science wing, a sideways glance in the dining hall. Then came the louder currents. Isn't that the janitor's kid? She's the one who's always in the math lab late at night. I heard she solved that Halden equation, the one even the postdocs avoid. The buzz built fast. Within 48 hours, she wasn't just Ava. She was a curiosity, a myth, a challenge to the natural order of Halcroft University. Students began showing up to her classes, not to learn, but to look. Some feigned politeness with forced smiles. Others just stared like she was a glitch in the simulation. One girl even tried to casually strike up a conversation in the bathroom, only to end it with a condescending, "Good for you though, you're like an inspiration." But Ava knew better. They weren't inspired. They were threatened. Professor Halden, meanwhile, said nothing publicly, not a word. But behind the scenes, he was moving quickly. He arranged a special demonstration during his advanced theoretical mathematics seminar, a seminar typically reserved for graduate students. That week, he opened it up to undergrads and faculty alike. The email was short, clinical. Subject: departmental seminar update. Body: this week's seminar will include a live review of complex probability theory, featuring one of our undergraduate scholars. Attendance is strongly encouraged. The room was packed. Over 60 students filed into the tall, echoing hall with its oak-paneled walls, an embroidered crimson seal at the front. Faculty members stood along the sides. A few visiting doctoral students leaned forward with intrigued expressions. Ava stood near the chalkboard, her palms slightly damp. She hadn't been asked if she wanted to present. She had been told to. Halden, standing beside her with a calm but icy demeanor, motioned toward the board. "This," he began, "is an equation I once called unsolvable. Miss Delaney here has offered a solution. We shall let her demonstrate." His voice carried no malice but no warmth either. It was the voice of a man sharpening a knife inside his smile. Ava stepped forward. She picked up the chalk, took a breath, and began. The room was deathly silent. With fluid motion, she reconstructed the formula line by line, curve by curve, variable by variable. Her mind did not pause. Her memory had carved this into her bones years ago. Within 40 seconds, it was complete. She underlined the final function, stepped back, turned around, silence. No applause, no acknowledgement. Just shifting eyes, pursed lips, and a few stunned stares. And then laughter. A short, cruel bark of it from a student in the back row, which quickly infected the others. Not everyone laughed, but enough did. Someone muttered, "Bet she memorized it from somewhere." Another voice, "I mean, how would she even come up with that?" A third, "AI tools can do all kinds of stuff now." Ava's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Her chest burned, not with shame, but something sharper, something closer to betrayal. Professor Halden approached the board, scanning the equation with narrowed eyes. His fingers traced the first line. "It's elegant, he said slowly. Certainly, mimics the structure of my earlier work. Quite well. Mimics. That word hit her like a slap. She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, he turned to the room. There are, of course, many ways to arrive at the appearance of accuracy without originality. But let us reserve judgment. Academic integrity requires more than performance. It requires proof. The implication wasn't subtle, and the crowd got the message. Later that day, the whispers grew crueler. She copied it. No way she did it alone. She probably found it online. Or someone gave it to her. By nightfall, Ava's inbox had 3 anonymous messages. Fraud. You'll be exposed. People like you don't do math. You just copy it. She didn't tell her father. Marcus had already begun noticing changes on campus. Faculty who once greeted him now kept their heads down. A supervisor forgot to include him on the cleaning roster, forcing him to double up on shifts. But he still believed in the system. He still believed in Hellcroft. Eva didn't want to shatter that for him. Not yet. But she was shattering. The next day she received another message. This time, not anonymous. From Rodendad, Hellcroft. Subject clarification request. Body. Ava. The board has requested a review of your work in light of recent concerns. I have suggested an internal review process to maintain confidentiality. We will notify you of next steps. She read it twice. Then again. Her ears rang. Concerns. Internal review. Confidential. They weren't going to celebrate her, they were going to bury her. That evening, while sitting alone on a bench near the old clock tower, Eva felt something slip beneath her. Not physically, but emotionally. Like the ground she'd built her identity on, had cracked open. She had done the impossible. She had done it under pressure, in front of everyone, and instead of applause, she was being investigated. Because genius in a black girl looked suspicious. Because brilliance, from someone whose father cleaned bathrooms, felt like a threat. Because Hellcroft was never designed for girls like her to win. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. A blocked number. She hesitated, then answered.
Miss Delaney, came a clipped voice. This is Dean Evers. You've received a request for academic misconduct proceedings. Professor Halden believes you may have had external assistance in your recent submission. We'll need you to appear before a small panel for a review. It will remain internal, confidential.
Her throat tightened. When? Soon. We'll be in touch. The line went dead. Eva stared at the phone, knuckles white around its edges. She knew what this was. Not just about her equation. Not just about pride. It was about making sure she never did it again. In the quiet of her dorm that night, a USB drive is slid under her door, with a sticky note that reads, "They've done this before. You're not the first." For black students, genius is never innocent. It's suspicious. The moment Ava plugged the anonymous USB into her laptop, the room changed. Not the lighting, not the air, but something deeper. The walls felt closer. The silence pressed harder. On screen, a single folder blinked. Hellcroft internal docs. Her heartbeat quickened. She glanced at the sticky note again. They've done this before. You're not the first. The contents of the drive loaded slowly. Too slowly. Her fingers trembled as she clicked through. Dozens of PDFs, audio clips, and confidential emails, all bearing internal department headers. Each file name was marked with years, 2004, 2011, 1997. But one file stood out. Probation Dear Delaney. She clicked it. It was a sealed memorandum from the Academic Integrity Board, already dated and digitally signed. Ava Delaney. Suspended pending full investigation. Effective immediately. She hadn't even received the email yet, and still the judgment had already been written. Eva sat back, her mind spinning. Her body felt detached from itself, like she was watching someone else sit in her chair, in her room, reading the slow death of her academic future unfold in real time. Minutes later it came. Subject. Academic notice. Immediate action required. From Academic Integrity Board. To Ava Delaney. Due to concerns regarding recent assessments and possible academic misconduct, you are hereby placed on immediate academic suspension. You are not permitted to attend classes or enter department facilities until the conclusion of this investigation. Details to follow. Sincerely, Dean Rosalind Everett. Her mouth went dry. She had been banned. No trial. No questions. No chance to explain. The campus moved quickly after that. By the time she stepped out the next morning, eyes followed her like laser scopes. No one spoke directly to her. They whispered behind folders, leaned into each other in cafe lines, and sent her screenshots of cruel Reddit threads, where strangers debated whether she was a liar, a symbol, or a fraud. One thread title hit the hardest. She's just a janitor's daughter. No way she did that alone. Eva scrolled through comments from classmates she had shared projects with. A few defended her, but most didn't. They questioned her handwriting, her sudden understanding. One even cited how quiet she always was, as proof she must be hiding something. As if intelligence was too loud to go unnoticed. As if black brilliance must come with warning lights to be real. Later that afternoon, she tried to enter the math building. Her ID card blinked red. Access denied. Two faculty walked past her, both white men in wool coats, and didn't even pause as they stepped through the door she'd just been locked out of. She sat on the cold stone steps, refusing to cry. Her father had taught her early, never let them see you crack. But even steel bends eventually. Down the hallway, Professor Halden watched from an office window. To him, this wasn't personal. It was preservation. His reputation, his credibility. They had been built on the certainty that the equation was unsolvable. And if a black girl, a janitor's kid, could solve it, what did that say about the white institution that had upheld him? It couldn't be true. He wouldn't let it be. Eva didn't know that Halden had met with the dean just the night before, that he'd framed her work as suspiciously fast, claimed she may have had unauthorized access to advanced solutions, and that multiple faculty expressed concerns privately. All lies, but lies that sounded respectable in boardrooms. When Marcus Delaney, her father, heard what had happened, he nearly dropped the mop handle he was gripping. His knuckles turned white. The anger in his chest was older than Ava, older than Halcroft, older than anything his worn-out boots had walked across. He asked to meet the dean. He dressed in his Sunday church shirt, tucked his mop bucket away early, and climbed the steps of the admin building. The secretary stared at him like he didn't belong until he spoke her boss's name. "I'm here to speak with Dean Evers. About my daughter, Eva Delaney." She gave him a strained smile. "I'm sorry, sir. The dean's calendar is full today. She'll make time. She's in meetings. I'll wait." "You can't wait here." Marcus stood taller. "This is a public university. And that's my child. I mopped these floors for 23 years. You don't get to tell me I can't stand here." 2 minutes later, security was called. They didn't arrest him. They didn't touch him. But they made their presence known. 2 guards with wide shoulders, soft voices, and hard eyes. "Sir, please step outside. I want to speak to the woman who just destroyed my daughter's life." "Not today, sir." That was when Marcus knew. Holcroft didn't want answers. They wanted silence. Eva met him outside that evening. He hadn't told her what happened. She could read it in his eyes. "They won't let you talk to her?" she asked softly. "No," he replied. "They said she was too busy to explain why they're stealing your future." They sat together on the steps, side by side. No words for several minutes. Finally, Ava said, "I didn't cheat, Dad." Marcus looked at her. His voice cracked. "I know. They just can't imagine someone like you being better than them." That night, she returned to her dorm to find the math lab access completely revoked from her student portal. Her solution, the one she wrote in 40 seconds, had been erased from the shared drives. Her login credentials no longer worked. It was as if the solution had never existed. They were trying to erase her work, just like they were trying to erase her. Back on the USB drive, Eva started combing through older documents. Buried in the middle of the folder, she found something odd, a scanned letter, faded ink, dated back to 1983, from a student named Darnell Williams. She'd never heard of him. The letter was addressed to the same board now investigating her. "I know what Professor Halden did. I have records. But I've already been told they'll never be considered valid, because I'm not a credible source. I'm leaving this school before they take any more from me. But one day someone will come who can finish what I started. I hope they don't break her before she gets there." The letter chilled her to the core. Eva looked at the header again. The letter wasn't just written by a student. It was from a math major, at Hellcroft, under Halden. Same department, same professor, same accusation. 40 years ago. She scrolled down further. Attached was a crude diagram of another complex equation. She squinted, then widened her eyes. It looked nearly identical to hers. Had this been done before? Had someone else, another black math student, been silenced and erased just like they were trying to do to her? The implications flooded in. This wasn't just about her solution. It was about protecting a pattern, a legacy, a system. Eva's fingers hovered over her keyboard. Then a knock at the door shattered the silence. She jumped. When she opened it, she found a man in his late 50s, corduroy jacket, thick glasses. He looked both tired and nervous. He glanced down the hallway, then leaned in and whispered, "I used to teach here. Before they pushed me out. You don't know me, but I know who you are. And I know what they're doing. You need to see this." He pressed another USB into her palm. When Ava plugs in the second drive, a hidden audio file autoplays, and she hears Professor Halden's voice saying, "We can't let another one of them take credit for this." The truth wasn't just hidden, it was buried under white brilliance. The audio file crackled to life the moment Ava plugged in the second USB. It wasn't labeled, no metadata, just an anonymous clip, rough, unedited, and then through the static, a familiar voice surfaced. Professor Richard Halden. His tone was less guarded than she had ever heard, unpolished, unfiltered, like someone speaking candidly in what they believed was privacy. "You see," the voice said, "the problem isn't that the equation can't be solved, it's that it can't be solved by someone who knows she's not supposed to." Silence followed. Then a chuckle, low, smug, chilling. "I mean, you give it to someone with pedigree, someone from the right background, they think too much, they know the limits. But you hand it to someone who doesn't know they're not allowed to be that smart. Sometimes they see through it." The audio cut. Eva stared at the screen, the words bouncing around her brain like bullets ricocheting off glass. Someone who doesn't know she's not supposed to. The arrogance, the layered cruelty, the open acknowledgement of brilliance, and the decision to suppress it. She leaned back, breath shallow. This wasn't just about her anymore. It wasn't even just about the equation. It was about a structure, a machine built to exclude, minimize and erase anyone who dared to be brilliant while black. The next file was a faculty report, dated 2015. It listed departmental concerns from anonymous professors. The comments weren't outright racist, but the language wrapped around familiar codes. Unclear how she achieved the results. Lacks prior indicators. Possibly overambitious for her background. She's sharp, but doesn't quite fit the Hullcroft academic culture. Each comment was about Ava. But they might as well have been about every black student who ever set foot in those halls. The folder held dozens of archived internal reviews, some marked with the names of white students who had solved complex problems, each celebrated and footnoted, their solutions published in academic journals. Ava clicked through one. S. Templeton, 2009, awarded Dean's Innovation Prize. Another. R. McAdams, 2012, published in Theoretical Mathematics Quarterly. She opened their files. Their work was similar to hers in complexity, but not revolutionary. And yet they'd been lifted high, paraded across newsletters, flown out to conferences, featured on Hullcroft's glossy brochures. But in the same archive, black names were always followed by the word incomplete or withdrawn. She found a folder titled Disciplinary Cases, Confidential. Inside were PDFs detailing every internal investigation from the past 4 decades. The vast majority, black or brown students, often for things as vague as suspected assistance, unauthorized resource access, or inconsistent academic trajectory. Then she saw it. D. Williams. Expelled? Her stomach dropped. She double-clicked the file. A scanned incident report flickered onto the screen. Darnell Williams, age 21, third-year mathematics major, raised in Birmingham, on full scholarship, accused of submitting unverified original work, challenged a professor's assessment, and then abruptly expelled following a closed-door hearing. The attached exhibits made Ava gasp. There, in faded ink and poor resolution, was a handwritten proof, the structure strikingly familiar. It was her equation, or at least its skeleton. The same sequence, the same logic tree. It was dated October 9, a full decade before she was even born. She clicked through the pages, her hands now shaking. There were annotations by faculty, including one by a young Professor Halden, then still an associate. His note read, "Student has potential but exhibits signs of overreach. Perhaps exposure beyond his station. Recommends separation before precedent is set." Beyond his station. Ava recoiled like she'd been slapped. She stared at Darnell's equation again, wondering how many times history had tried to shine through the cracks, only to be sealed over by academic concrete. She thought of the whisper from the old faculty member the night before. "I used to teach here. Before they pushed me out." How many others were there? How many moments of genius had been buried because they didn't come from white hands? She moved to another folder. Curriculum Review Committee, 1990-2020. One file caught her eye: Curriculum Cutbacks Diversity Initiative Concerns. Inside was a discussion about halting a minority scholarship math program. The language was clinical, emotionless. Statistical performance below departmental standards. Difficult to integrate these students into existing academic culture. Lowering entry barriers could damage institutional reputation. No mention of the fact those same diversity students had been routinely underfunded, overlooked and excluded from elite mentorships. No mention of how their work had been dismissed before it could be defended. Eva closed her laptop, heart pounding. The walls of Hallcroft weren't just stained with subtle racism. They were built on it. Layered in bureaucracy, in whitewashed paperwork. This place didn't just tolerate erasure. It depended on it. And Halden wasn't a rogue actor. He was a gatekeeper. A beneficiary of a system that rewarded him every time he made sure someone like Darnell or Ava stayed out of the light. She sat frozen in her chair, the silence around her heavier than ever. Outside her dorm window, campus life continued as if none of this mattered. Students crossed lawns, laughed in groups, studied under trees, unaware that just beneath their feet lay stories buried deeper than any textbook dared to teach. Yvonne knew now that she couldn't go back. Not to quiet compliance, not to cautious gratitude, not to the invisible student in the corner. She wasn't just a target anymore. She was evidence. She stood and pulled out her notebook, the same one where she'd resolved the equation weeks earlier, and began copying down every note, every name, every file worth remembering. Not for herself, but for everyone who came after. Then her phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number. He knows you found it. Seconds later, another message. Same number. Check your student file. They just changed your records. Ava rushed to her campus portal, logged in with shaking hands. Her profile loaded, slower than usual. Then her academic history appeared. 3 courses were now marked as incomplete. 1, the course where she solved the equation, was missing altogether. It was like she had never taken it. Like she had never solved anything. Like she had never existed in their system. As she stared at the digital erasure of her identity, a knock rattled her door, and when she opened it, a courier handed her a sealed envelope, marked "to be opened in presence of legal counsel." She wasn't the first black mind erased by Hallcroft, just the most public one. The envelope in Ava's hand felt heavier than paper should. The seal was official, embossed with Hallcroft's crest, the same emblem stamped on every classroom podium, every diploma, every wall that whispered, "You should be grateful to be here." But Ava didn't open it. Not yet. The words "to be opened in presence of legal counsel" weren't a suggestion. They were a threat. She tucked the envelope inside her notebook, locked her dorm door behind her, and headed straight to the library. Not to study, but to dig. The name Darnell Williams had haunted her thoughts since she'd seen it in the confidential file. She needed to know who he really was, and what exactly had been taken from him. Hallcroft's public records were sanitized. Predictable. When she searched his name in the student archives, the system responded with a blinking line, and the message: no records found. No enrollment. No disciplinary action. No thesis. Nothing. But Ava was done looking where they wanted her to look. She opened the municipal archives instead. Old newspaper scans, public graduation lists, digitized local interviews. It took hours, and her eyes burned from staring at the glowing screen. But then, she found it. A grainy photo in a 1983 local education digest. Hallcroft honors junior mathematician for statewide research award. Beneath the photo was a name: Darnell Williams. The caption praised his early submission of a groundbreaking theoretical model in probability science. Her breath caught. His face was lean, sharp-eyed, maybe 21. He wore the same cautious expression she saw in the mirror every morning. A mix of hunger and guarded pride. The article listed his scholarship, hometown, Mobile, Alabama, and mentioned his mentor, Associate Professor Richard Halden. Her stomach dropped. The connection was no longer speculation. Halden hadn't just erased Darnell. He'd once sponsored him, and that made the betrayal all the more deliberate. Ava dug deeper. She searched through scanned letters to the editor, opinion pieces from alumni, and finally landed on a controversial story buried in the university's unofficial newspaper. A black and white article titled, "Promising Black Student Expelled After Theft Allegations." The text was sharp and vague at once. Darnell had been accused of stealing unpublished faculty documents. No evidence was cited. No details released. Just a quiet administrative expulsion after violating the integrity of the department. Sound familiar? Even the language mirrored her own investigation. But one paragraph stood out. A classmate had anonymously written, Darnell talked often about how he solved something big. He said Heldon told him it wasn't publishable yet. He started acting paranoid, told me he'd been watched, his work copied. Then he was gone. Just like that, gone, erased. Eva felt the blood in her veins begin to boil, not in anger, but in knowing. She was staring at a blueprint. Her life was being run on repeat. Except this time, they had picked the wrong student to silence. She turned to the digitized alumni databases next. Most names led to law firms, tech companies, lecture circuits. Darnell's name never reappeared. Until she tried something different, searching employment databases by city and age. That's when she saw it. A low-resolution staff directory from a small community college in eastern Pennsylvania. Facilities department. Listing Williams, Darnell, custodial services, hired. It wasn't proof, but it was enough. Eva packed her bag and left campus that evening with nothing but her notes, her laptop and a metro ticket. She rode 3 hours in silence. When she stepped off the train, the town was quiet, worn-down strip malls, flickering streetlights, and a sense that no one came here to be found. The college was open late. Maintenance crews worked in hushed rhythms. She walked through the halls pretending to be lost, until she saw him, pushing a gray mop bucket through a dimly lit corridor, his back slightly hunched, wearing a name tag that read simply, Darnell. Her footsteps slowed. He turned. Their eyes met. Eva spoke first, her voice low. Mr. Williams? He blinked, guarded. Who's asking? My name is Ava Delaney, she said, her throat tightening. I'm from Hallcroft. His face didn't move, but his grip on the mop handle tightened, almost imperceptibly. I think they did to me what they did to you, she added. The silence stretched. He studied her, the same way someone checks a wall for cracks they know are already there. Come with me, he said finally. He led her to a small break room. Fluorescent light buzzed above. He poured 2 paper cups of coffee and sat, staring at her across the table like she was both a ghost and a mirror. I knew this day might come, he said. I found your thesis, Ava told him. They buried it. They copied you. Heldon. Don't say that name in front of me. Darnell interrupted, not loud but firm. He took more than just my work. He took my name. He sipped the coffee, and for a moment the old man disappeared, replaced by someone sharper, more awake than he'd allowed himself to be in years. I solved something I wasn't supposed to, he continued. I didn't realize that was a crime. They called it theft, Ava whispered. They called it theft because they couldn't call it rebellion, Darnell said. And if I fought it, I would have been destroyed. So I let them erase me. His voice cracked, not from weakness, but from too many years of silence being broken. Why didn't you go public? Because back then, no one would have listened. No phones, no viral anything. Just a black kid against a white system, with tenure and lawyers. Ava leaned in. I'm going to finish what you started, she said. Darnell looked up at her, eyes glassy. I tried to. I really did. But they control everything. The curriculum, the board, the media. Even if you prove them wrong, they'll still write the story like you failed. But what if this time, the story writes itself? Ava asked. He gave a hollow laugh. That's the hope every generation clings to. They sat in silence. Eva reached into her bag and pulled out the envelope. They're threatening legal action. Told me to open this with a lawyer present. Darnell squinted at it. They want to intimidate you. Scare you into staying quiet. I'm not scared, she said. Not anymore. He looked at her again. For a long time. I have something you need to see, he said finally. Something I kept even when I burned the rest. He stood, walked to a locked cabinet in the corner, and pulled out a dusty folder labeled Partial Theorem, 19. Inside were more pages, handwritten formulas, diagrams, footnotes. Ava scanned them, and her mouth fell open. These weren't just similar to her mother's equation. They were nearly identical, but older, raw, untamed. Darnell leaned in. I didn't just solve the problem. I think your mother might have seen my work before she tried to solve hers. Ava's head jerked up. What? I recognized her name. Delaney. She visited campus in '02. Gave a small talk in the community hall. I was there. She quoted work that sounded eerily familiar. I wondered back then if she'd somehow seen what I did. Ava's pulse raced. Her mother and Darnell. Two minds separated by time, both silenced by the same gatekeeper. Darnell pulled out one last item, a faded photograph of her mother and him standing side by side at a Hallcroft community seminar. She told me, he whispered, that one day her daughter would finish it. That was you, wasn't it? One erased genius mentors, another from the shadows. The faded photo sat between them like a bridge across decades. Ava stared at it, her mother's face staring back at her, younger, radiant, hopeful. Beside her, Darnell Williams looked thinner, but alive in a way he didn't anymore. The date on the photo's back was scrawled in red ink, October 2002 Hallcroft Seminar Series. She told me she had a daughter, Darnell said, voice quiet. Didn't say much, just that she believed you'd go farther than both of us. Said you had a way of seeing numbers like music. Eva's hands trembled around the photo. She had searched so long for fragments of her mother, and now here was one, hidden in the shadows of a man the world had erased. She never mentioned this, Ava said, her voice tight. Not you, not this place. Darnell gave a sad smile. That's how they get you. Make you feel like talking about it is the problem. Like you're keeping the racism alive just by remembering it. He pushed aside the photo and unfolded the stack of yellowed pages. Ava recognized the curvature of the symbols instantly, the rhythm of how he attacked the problem, how he mapped out pathways no one else had dared to consider. It mirrored her own solution down to the way he boxed key formulas on the edge, as if protecting them.
This is the same method, she murmured. Not copied. Parallel. It's like you were running the same track 20 years ahead of me.
I was, Darnell said, until I wasn't. He sat back and exhaled. Halden watched me work on this for months. At first he encouraged me, asked questions, gave subtle pointers. But once I started making real progress, he changed, became cold, then distant. Then suddenly, I was being accused of stealing documents from his office. Documents that, by the way, never even surfaced. And no one questioned it. Ava asked. Darnell laughed, not bitter but hollow. They didn't need to. The accusation was the evidence. The word of a black student against a rising white academic star. Alcroft didn't blink. The reality of it settled over Ava like ash. Holden hadn't just doubted black brilliance. He'd profited from it. Stolen it. Repackaged it in his own voice and buried the source behind polite administrative language. And the worst part, Darnell added, wasn't the expulsion. It was the silence after. No one asked where I went. No one cared what happened to the bright young black scholar. I just disappeared. Ava's eyes stung, but she didn't let the tears fall. You didn't disappear, she said. They hid you, but I found you, and I'm not letting them do it again. Darnell studied her. You're brave. But being brave at Hallcroft isn't enough. They'll come at you sideways, starve your funding, smear your name, drain your spirit. They won't destroy you in public. They'll do it behind closed doors and call it policy. I know, Ava said. And when they realize they can't intimidate you, they'll go after my father. That silenced the room. Darnell nodded slowly. Then you need to decide, are you here to survive or to scorch the ground? Ava didn't blink. I'm here to finish what they tried to erase. For the next 2 hours, they worked side by side. Darnell pulled out scanned documents, one that matched Halden's 1991 publication almost word for word. Ava's eyes widened as she compared it to his earlier draft. Darnell had outlined the theory 3 years before the paper was published under Halden's name. He stole your framework, Ava whispered, and built a career off it, Darnell said. Ava took pictures, notes, every piece of documentation that could prove Halden's theft. She knew what this meant. This wasn't just academic misconduct. It was intellectual plagiarism, wrapped in systemic racism, covered by institutional protection. Go public with this, Darnell said, sliding the last folder across the table. But do it smart. Don't go to Hallcroft. Go over them. To who? To the people who care more about justice than reputations. Ava paused. She'd spent weeks playing defense, trying to prove she belonged, begging to be heard. That was over. Now, she had evidence. Now, she had strategy. And now, she had a mentor. They packed up as midnight approached. Before she left, Darnell grabbed her hand. I lost my name. Don't lose yours. Ava nodded, her jaw clenched. As she stepped outside into the cold night air, her phone rang. She pulled it from her coat pocket. The screen glowed. "Dad," she answered. "Hey." His voice came through, low and careful. "They cut my hours." "What?" "Got a call from my supervisor tonight," said the department's restructuring. "Starting next week they're moving me to part-time." Her heart sank.
That doesn't make sense. You've been there for decades.
"Doesn't matter. They know I'm your father, and they know you're causing noise." A pause. "And Ava," he added, "they already took me off your building's rotation. They're trying to separate us." Ava gripped the phone tighter. "They're trying to starve us out," Marcus said. Ava looked down at her screen and saw a new email from the university's legal office. Subject line: "Immediate financial review. Scholarship under investigation. When you expose the powerful, they don't shout, they strangle." Ava's inbox was gone. Not emptied. Gone. When she logged into her Hallcroft student account the morning after her father's phone call, her credentials failed. Invalid user. She tried twice. Then again. Nothing. She checked the university help portal using a guest browser and saw the small banner in red. "Account deactivated. Under administrative review." No warning. No explanation. Just silence. That silence wasn't limited to her inbox. Her nameplate had disappeared from the math department's student bulletin board. The keycard she used to access the science library beeped red at the door. Notices started arriving in the mail. Her housing grant rescinded. Her lab access suspended for ongoing academic integrity review. And finally a cryptic memo from the financial aid office. Pending reassessment of scholarship eligibility due to inconsistencies in performance metrics. It wasn't just one thing. It was everything. Slowly and precisely pulled apart like threads unraveling a life she had spent years stitching together. The institution wasn't screaming at her. It was suffocating her. And her father, already on the chopping block, was next. By the end of the week, Marcus Delaney was working 12 hours fewer than he had been 2 weeks ago. His dental insurance had been paused for internal payroll restructuring. When he tried to speak to HR, the meeting was rescheduled indefinitely. Then one morning, he was summoned into a small office near the campus utilities dock. Waiting inside were 2 compliance officers and a clipboard. "We received an anonymous complaint," the woman in a beige blazer said, eyes unreadable. "It alleges you were seen lingering in academic buildings without authorization." Marcus blinked. "I clean academic buildings." "Yes," she said. "But the complaint says you were found in restricted faculty spaces. After hours." "I've had the same night rotation for years," he replied. They exchanged looks. "That's being reviewed," she said. They didn't accuse him of theft, not directly. But the implication hung in the air, like smoke. By the time Marcus walked out of that office, he knew. They were coming after him the only way they could, by turning him into a liability. Back in her dorm, Ava sat on her stripped-down mattress, fingers wrapped around a half-empty cup of coffee, her eyes hollow from sleepless nights. One by one, the classmates she had shared notes with, studied beside, even eaten lunch with, began blocking her. She noticed it in the group chats, names disappearing, threads thinning. When she walked into the dining hall, a group of students laughed as she passed. She turned, and they stopped mid-laugh. One of them muttered, "Guess AI really does help anyone now." Even professors stopped looking her in the eye. The same people who had once praised her quiet work ethic now passed her in the halls like she didn't exist. Hallcroft had launched its most effective punishment, erasure, and it was working, until Ava found the network. It was Darnell who led her to it. She met him again in the college break room, where they'd first spoken. His face was grim, eyes darker. "I told a few people about you," he said, "people who remember what it felt like. They want to help." Ava followed him to a library in downtown Philadelphia, tucked behind a bookstore. There in a back room dimly lit by desk lamps and determination, sat 5 black men and women, each in their late 40s to early 60s. Some were academics. One was a software developer. Another worked in public education. All had one thing in common. They had studied at Hallcroft, and all of them had left broken. "You're not the first, Ava," said Miss Ronette Cole, a former chemistry student who had been expelled in the 90s for what they called data inconsistencies in her research. Her project had later shown up, revised under her white professor's name. "This school eats black intellect and spits out regret," said Kevin Dunley. who had dropped out after a miscommunication about his funding that left him houseless for a semester. One by one, they told her their stories. The misdirected emails, the disappearances from publications, the sudden accusations, the meetings where they were asked to consider alternatives. Eva listened in silence. Her chest felt tight. It wasn't just her future that had been hijacked. It was their history. When the last story ended, Eva spoke. They're doing it again, and they're doing it with paperwork, not punches. That's how they get away with it. Kevin leaned forward. Then don't just tell your story. Tell all of ours. Expose the pattern. Miss Cole added. They can deny one of us, but they can't deny a system. But how? Eva asked. They've sealed my records, deactivated my email. I have no platform. A man from the corner finally spoke. His voice was soft but clear. Then use theirs. He slid a thick folder toward her. Inside were internal directories, staff emails, screenshots of outdated server dashboards. You're not the only one who collected receipts, he said. We've been saving ours for decades. And just like that, Ava's war became a movement. She compiled every piece of evidence she had. Darnell's original work, Halden's audio, deleted thesis records, the archived complaints. She began scanning documents, backing up everything across multiple drives, sending copies to the network. Every new name that surfaced in her research, she added to a growing file titled, The Silenced. One night, her phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. I worked at Hallcroft for 15 years. I saw what they did to Darnell, and now you. I'm ready to talk. Ava replied. Who are you? The next message came with a photo, a faculty ID badge, long expired. Dr. Emily Roston, former Department of Mathematics. She'd left 10 years ago. No one knew why. I can testify, her next message said. But only anonymously. They destroyed me once already. I can't let them know I'm back. Eva's breath caught. Here it was. The first faculty insider. A witness. Not just someone with sympathy, but someone who saw the machine from the inside. She wrote back. Why now? The typing bubbles pulsed, then came the answer. Because I stayed quiet for too long. Because I saw your mother walk off that campus in silence. Because I watched Darnell's dreams rot in a file cabinet. And because when you stood in front of that chalkboard, I saw something they can't erase this time. Ava stared at the screen, then watched as a second message came in. This time from the university's IT department. Notice your digital records have been archived pending deletion. Please contact the office immediately. No witnesses, no press, no parents. Just a girl versus a panel of professors. The email arrived at 6:12 a.m. Cold and bureaucratic, as if stamped by a machine rather than written by a human being. You are required to appear for an academic integrity hearing today at 9:00 a.m. in room B204. Attendance is mandatory. No advisors, legal counsel, or guardians permitted. 3 hours notice. 3 hours to determine the fate of her years of work. Her future. Her name. 3 hours to prepare for the same men who had orchestrated her erasure behind closed doors. Ova stared at the screen, heart pounding but steady. This was the moment they had been circling her toward, the quiet execution, the paperwork burial. Not a public spectacle, but a covert one. Not a fight, but a silence. Her father wanted to come with her.
You're not walking into that alone, he said, grabbing his worn jacket.
You can't be in the room, she reminded him gently. They made sure of that. Then I'll wait outside. She nodded. They walked across campus together. A December wind cut between the buildings, stiff and unforgiving, but Ava barely felt it. The students crossed in clusters, laughing, shoving each other playfully, sipping coffee. None looked at her worse. Some looked, then looked away quickly, as if noticing her was dangerous now. When she reached the second-floor corridor of the administration building, 2 security officers stood on either end of the hallway, not to protect her, but to isolate her. Marcus squeezed her hand once. Remember who you are, he whispered. She entered. The room was stark beige walls, fluorescent lights, a long wooden table, polished to a shine. 3 men in dark suits sat behind it, each with a stack of papers and identical blank expressions. And there, leaning back in his chair with slow, deliberate satisfaction, was Professor Richard Halden. He didn't greet her. He didn't need to. The smirk already said everything. Eva sat in the lone metal chair placed in the center of the room. No desk, no water, no dignity, just a spotlight of attention meant to intimidate. Dr. Sawyer, the chair of the panel, cleared his throat. Miss Delaney, this hearing concerns allegations of academic misconduct related to your recent work submitted in Professor Halden's course. We intend to determine whether your solution was independently produced or obtained through unauthorized means. He spoke like reading a weather report. Eva kept her voice even. I produced it independently. Yes, Alden drawled. But the question is how? He leaned forward, fingers laced. Your academic trajectory has been modest at best. No startling breakthroughs, no exceptional participation. And then suddenly, he snapped his fingers softly. A perfect solution to a theory experts struggle with for years. Quite miraculous. Miracles, Eva said, aren't always magic. Sometimes they're just unseen work. Sawyer cut in. We will ask the questions. You will provide clear answers. The interrogation began. Did anyone assist you? No. Did you consult external sources beyond course guidelines? No. Did you use any generative AI tools? No. Do you deny spending significant time in unauthorized lab spaces? I studied in the math lab after hours. I had card access. Holden's eyes flickered. Heck. Did you at any point receive academic materials from outside the institution? No. They were not listening to her answers. They were waiting for her to slip. Professor Grayson, a man with an immaculate gray beard and a reputation for icy detachment, leaned forward. Your solution appears rehearsed, as if memorized rather than understood. Eva inhaled sharply. It's rehearsed because I've been studying it for years. The equation belonged to my mother before it belonged to me. I grew up watching her explore it. I didn't steal anything. I learned it. Holden tilted his head. Convenient. It's true. He tesked softly. Childhood stories are not academic evidence. Then he slid a sheet of paper across the table. This is the formal complaint, signed by multiple faculty. Eva recognized none of the names. Holden smiled wider. Anomalies in your performance, sudden changes in your output, behavioral irregularities, enough concern to justify this hearing. Sawyer added, the integrity of Hallcroft's academic record is paramount. And what about the integrity of its students? Eva asked quietly. Silence, the kind that thickened the air. Holden crossed his arms. Miss Delaney, you claim this solution is your own. Show us. Eva blinked. What? The equation, he said. Derive it. A piece of chalk was pushed toward her, along with a blank board behind the table. She hadn't been expecting this, but she stood anyway. She walked to the board, breathed once, and let instinct take over. Equations flowed from her fingertips like currents, smooth, purposeful, precise. She mapped each variable. She built each step. She eliminated redundancies. She drew the same relationships she had drawn since she was 13. And when she finished, she stepped back and faced the panel. Not shaking. Not apologizing. Owning it. The room stayed still. Sawyer frowned, flipping through a folder. These steps are similar to the submitted version, but not identical. They shouldn't be identical, Eva replied. One was my draft. This is memory. Halden lifted a brow. Or performance. I'm not performing, she said. I'm proving. Grayson scribbled something. Handwriting?
Uva frowned. What?
We'd like samples of earlier work. To compare style, she removed her old notebook from her bag. Dog-eared, soft from childhood, filled with scribbles from years of learning beside her mother. She handed it across the table. Sawyer opened it, skimmed lightly, then closed it. No dates, no timestamps. They're personal notes, Eva said. From when Holden cut in. Convenient.
That word again.
Convenient. He stood, slowly buttoning his suit jacket. Miss Delaney, talent does not concern us. Integrity does. And your case has too many questionable factors to ignore. Sawyer nodded. Grayson capped his pen. Ava's stomach dropped. They were done listening. Sawyer folded his hands. We have heard your testimony. The panel will now deliberate. They did not leave the room. They simply turned away from her chair and whispered to each other softly, quickly, with no debate. It took less than 20 seconds. Then Sawyer faced her. Miss Delaney, he said, the panel has determined that your submission cannot be verified as entirely your own work. Eva froze. You calling me a cheater? We are ruling your work academically compromised, Sawyer replied. Your grade will be voided pending further review, and your suspension will remain in effect. Holden stepped closer. And, Miss Delaney, he said, Voice hushed, but vicious. You should know that even if the public supports you, Hallcroft's standards are not governed by internet applause. Uva's pulse hammered in her ears. You ruined a student decades ago, she whispered. Now you're doing it again. Alden's face remained perfectly calm. I maintain standards. History will thank me. Sawyer pushed a form forward. This is the ruling. We require your acknowledgement. Eva stared at the paper. Then she looked each man in the eye. No. Sawyer blinked. Pardon? I'm not signing a lie, Eva said, voice steady. You can't erase me as easily as you erased him. For the first time, Halden's expression faltered. Just slightly. Sawyer sighed. Refusal to sign will be noted. He signed instead. Then Grayson. Then Halden. Their pens glided across the page like sealing a verdict. Eva felt something inside her snap. Not her confidence. Not her hope. But the last illusion that any of these men had ever wanted the truth. She stood. Are we done? She asked. Sawyer nodded. We are. She left without another word. The hallway outside was cold. Her father stood instantly when he saw her. Ava? He whispered. She shook her head softly. They decided before I walked in. Marcus clenched his jaw, fury trembling through him. But he held her shoulders gently. We'll fight. She nodded, though her chest felt hollow. As they began walking toward the exit, a figure stepped from behind a vending machine. A boy with messy blonde hair, round glasses, and a backpack slung low. Blake Emery. He swallowed hard, eyes wide with urgency. Ava, he whispered, stepping closer. Don't freak out. What? He lifted his phone. I've been recording everything. And it's already uploading. When institutions fail, sometimes it takes a teenager with Wi-Fi to spark justice. It happened overnight. The video was barely edited. Just a black screen and raw audio. Muffled at first, then clearer, the tense, icy room where Ava Delaney sat alone across from 3 faculty members. No lawyers. No advocate. Just her voice. Calm, firm, fighting through every implication. Every loaded question. Then the unmistakable voice of Professor Halden asking, and how would someone like you develop such a solution in so little time? The video was titled, The Hearing Hallcroft Didn't Want You to Hear. It was uploaded by a freshman journalism major named Blake Emery, a name Ava had seen once or twice in her lecture halls, but never truly registered. He was young, awkward, often quiet in class, but somehow, he'd been there the day of her secret hearing. Sitting in the back, pretending to be invisible. He hadn't been invited, but he hadn't been stopped either. And he'd recorded everything. Blake had waited, listened, watched the university maneuver to crush Ava without leaving fingerprints. And when he saw her locked out of her dorm access and her father being watched by campus security, something snapped. He uploaded the hearing. He included a folder of screenshots Ava had sent him, internal emails, reports, audio clips of Halden's stolen comments. He didn't ask for permission. He just hit publish. And by sunrise, Ava's life changed. Ava Was Right began trending within 4 hours. Then came the duets, the stitches, the reaction clips. Black STEM students across the country started sharing their own stories under the hashtag, My professor said my results were statistically unlikely. They said my writing was too advanced for someone like me. I watched them hand my project to a white group and say it needed better branding. A wave of voices began to rise, not in anger alone, but in unison, not a mob, but a movement. Then came the media. The first article appeared on a niche education blog, then a college equity newsletter, then BuzzFeed, then Vice CNN, and MSNBC followed by nightfall. Black math prodigy. Ava Delaney suspended after solving impossible equation. Then comes the leak. Hallcroft tried to control the narrative. They issued a statement by midday. We take all academic concerns seriously, and are committed to integrity, fairness, and the protection of all students. But the internet didn't care about PR templates. They cared about receipts. Blake released more faculty rosters, showing who signed off on her suspension before the investigation even started. Screenshots of Ava's deactivate accounts. The document where Halden noted her background made her case statistically irregular. It was impossible to spin. The university's silence had roared too loudly, and now it was collapsing in real time. Ava watched it unfold from her dorm room, which by some miracle hadn't been revoked yet. Darnell was on speakerphone. Her father sat beside her on the edge of her stripped-down bed. She didn't speak. She barely breathed. For the first time in weeks, she was seen, not pitied, not tokenized, seen. They can't walk this back, Marcus said softly. They went too far. But Ava knew better. They'd try. Because institutions like Hellcroft didn't apologize. They adapted. They sacrificed pawns to protect kings. And the next day Hellcroft proved it. They announced a press conference, held in the university's central quad, the one with the pristine fountain, the brick path, and the 100-year-old oak. Reporters gathered, students hovered at the edges, faculty stood with arms folded tight. Dean Rosalind Evers took the podium. Her face was tight, her eyes unreadable behind thin glasses. The same woman who never responded to Ava's emails now faced a sea of cameras. After careful internal review, she began, and in light of new evidence that was not previously available to the board, we are announcing several decisions today. The crowd leaned in. First, we have accepted the immediate resignation of Professor Richard Halden. A pause. Gasps rippled through the quad. Some students cheered. Others exchanged stunned looks. Eva stood behind a low campus fence, arms crossed, her father beside her. Dean Evers continued. We thank Professor Halden for his decades of service and his numerous contributions to the academic legacy of Hallcroft. His departure is not an admission of misconduct, but a transition aligned with our evolving values. That sentence burned.
Not misconduct.
Just transition. Even in disgrace, they dressed him in gold. But then came the second announcement. Effective immediately, Ava Delaney has been fully reinstated with all rights and privileges as a Hallcroft student. Her record has been cleared. Her solution will be submitted for review by an independent academic panel. The crowd erupted. Cameras spun to Ava. Students turned and stared. And for the first time, Ava didn't feel small. She felt undeniable. Dean Evers continued. We are also initiating an internal review of historical academic cases to ensure fairness and equity across all departments. It sounded good. It was meant to sound good. But Ava knew what it was. Survival dressed as reform. Hallcroft hadn't changed. It had just been caught. Later that evening, Ava received a call from a number she didn't recognize. She answered anyway. Miss Delaney? Yes. This is Dr. Emil Calder, from the National Association of Mathematicians. We reviewed the audio in your solution draft. Eva froze. I'd like to personally invite you to present your findings at our winter symposium. She sat down slowly, knees weak. I'd be honored. One more thing, he added. We'd like to credit the work as collaborative. We've been reviewing a similar foundational theory submitted in the 1980s by a student named Darnell Williams. Eva's throat tightened. Yes, she whispered. That's who taught me everything they tried to make me forget. The call ended. She sat in silence. Everything had changed, not because Hallcroft chose justice, but because a student with Wi-Fi and guts chose truth. Eva opened her laptop. New messages flooded her inbox. One stood out. From a student in Georgia. I saw what you did. They told me I wasn't smart enough to major in math. I almost believed them, but now I'm staying. Thank you. Ava closed her eyes, exhaled slowly. The war wasn't over, but they had won a battle. As she refreshed her inbox again, a new message appeared, this one encrypted and unsigned. We were forced out too, but we kept the original proof. It's bigger than just Hallcroft. Equation Foundations, Lost Records, 1982 B.T. The email came at 6:17 a.m. Subject line, Official Apology and Resolution Update. No salutation, no warmth, just a formal letter, riddled with sterile legal language, and carefully calculated remorse. Hallcroft University deeply regretted any confusion, and acknowledged that upon further review, no conclusive evidence of academic misconduct was found. There was no mention of guilt, no reference to racism, no acknowledgement of the emotional wreckage Ava Delaney had been dragged through. It was an apology crafted not from sincerity, but survival. She sat on the edge of her narrow dorm bed, rereading the words over and over. Her hands trembled slightly, not from relief, but disbelief. Outside her window, the autumn sun filtered through the yellow leaves, mocking the frost still clinging to her spirit. She had won, technically, but there was no celebration, only silence. The kind that screamed louder than any insult ever could. When she returned to campus that morning, the change was immediate, but superficial. Her student ID was reactivated, her campus email restored, her housing reinstated, though now, curiously, she was offered a new dorm assignment in a building far from the mathematics wing. She declined it. She had no intention of hiding. A few heads turned as she walked through Hallcroft's main quad, but most eyes slid away, avoiding hers like her presence was a burning accusation. Professors crossed paths with her and offered curt nods or quickly turned down alternate hallways. No one said welcome back. No one said sorry. The same students who had once whispered behind her back now looked through her, treating her return like an unresolved glitch in the system. She passed a group of faculty members near the old mathematics building. Professor Halden was not among them. His name had been quietly scrubbed from the faculty roster overnight. Rumor had it he had retired with honor, a phrase that made Ava's stomach twist. He had resigned before the flames reached him. His record remained polished, his dignity preserved. There would be no official acknowledgement of the damage he caused, no retraction of his lies, no justice in his so-called retirement. Worse still, the equation she had solved, the very problem that had upended her life, had been renamed in the university's database. No attribution, no credit, just a sterile numeric code where her name should have been. It was like she never existed. Hallcroft offered her resources, mandatory counseling sessions, adjustment time from classes, a weekly check-in with a student affairs advisor. They didn't want to support her. They wanted to manage her. The university didn't see a genius return to her rightful place. It saw a PR liability, a ticking bomb of public sympathy that had to be contained. Eva sat in the library later that week, in the same corner she had claimed during her first semester, the forgotten alcove behind the philosophy shelves. The table still bore her old etchings in the wood, faint marks where she'd scribbled equations when stress had nowhere else to go. But now she didn't feel like a student. She felt like a ghost haunting the architecture. Even the students who had once shown her mild friendliness now avoided her. A few stared from afar, curiosity and caution dancing in their eyes. Some saw her as brave, others, dangerous, most, inconvenient. There was no social club asking her to join, no study group welcoming her back. She had become a symbol, but symbols were not people. They were meant to be looked at, quoted, and then forgotten. She received an envelope in her campus mailbox on a Thursday. No return address. Inside was a single letter on crisp cream paper. We would be honored to have you present your solution at this year's MIT National Mathematics Symposium. It read. Her fingers gripped the letter tightly, the edges pressing into her skin. No one from Hallcroft had ever invited her to speak. But MIT had seen her. They believed her work was worth a stage. She sat in silence for a long moment, the hum of the library lights filling the air around her. Something in her shifted, not in triumph, but in clarity. All of it was never about healing. The apology had been a performance, the silence of her classmates, a shield. The honors they offered came not from admiration, but fear of exposure. They didn't want to lift her up. They wanted to move on. And Ava Delaney would not let them. She looked up from the letter, her eyes steady, her voice rising only in her heart. This was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of theirs. The one where the girl they tried to erase became the name they couldn't ignore. Just as she folded the letter and tucked it into her bag, her phone buzzed. An email notification appeared from an unfamiliar address. Ori Darnell's theorem, confidential request. She opened it and gasped. What one university tried to bury, the world came to witness. The conference room at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology had never held this much tension, not even during Nobel visits. It was supposed to be just another math symposium. But the moment Ava Delaney's name was added to the lineup, attendance exploded. By the time the session began, the auditorium was overflowing. Attendees stood shoulder to shoulder in the aisles, leaning against the back walls, spilling into the hallway where the event was being live-streamed onto screens. They weren't just here to watch a math lecture. They were here to witness a reckoning. The buzz from Hallcroft's scandal had only grown. In the weeks since Blake Emery's leaked audio and the internet's unforgiving spotlight, Ava had gone from suspended student to reluctant symbol. Her reinstatement had been grudging, but her voice and her work had broken free of campus gates. And now, she stood before a room of global academics, STEM prodigies, journalists and students, clutching a slim stack of handwritten notes and breathing slow. Behind her on the screen, the full equation. In her front row, wearing a neatly pressed coat and sitting perfectly still, was Darnell Williams. The lights dimmed slightly. Ava stepped to the podium. My name is Ava Delaney, she began, her voice steady. And today I'm going to walk you through a solution once deemed impossible. Not because it was uncrackable, but because of who cracked it. There was a ripple in the crowd, not applause, not noise, just a shift in collective attention. She had them. She mapped the equation line by line, not just solving it, but telling its story, where it had come from, what it revealed, and most importantly, who had been left out along the way. At one point she paused and clicked to the next slide. A grainy image appeared. A scan of Darnell's original notebook. Gasps echoed through the crowd. This equation, she said, was first touched nearly 4 decades ago by Darnell Williams. A student erased before his work could be seen. Darnell looked down, blinking hard. Eva continued. He wasn't the only one. There were others. Brilliant minds denied space because their brilliance was unexpected, unwelcome, inconvenient. I solved this problem, yes, but only because someone like him laid the groundwork, even if the world refused to name it. She laid out her methodology next, slow, transparent, flawless. She traced each concept's lineage back to its earliest origin. Her logic wasn't just rigorous. It was undeniable. Then she turned off the slide deck. I didn't come here today to just prove a theorem, she said quietly. I came to prove a point. A hush fell over the room.
This was never about math. It was about who we let solve it.
A long silence followed. Then a wave of applause. Not polite, not restrained. A standing ovation that started with a few and then erupted into a roar. Darnell stood too. Slowly, hands trembling as he clapped. His eyes were wet, his mouth pressed into a line he couldn't keep still. For the first time in decades, his work, his name had returned to the room he was forced to leave. When Eva stepped down from the stage, multiple hands reached out for hers. She shook them, thanked them, but kept walking straight to Darnell. She reached for his shoulder. We did it, she whispered. He nodded, unable to speak. The clip of her speech hit the internet before she even left the building. Ava Delaney trended globally. News outlets cut into their broadcasts to air segments of her quote. Twitter threads broke down her methodology in plain language. TikTok creators dramatized her battle against Halcroft. Podcasts debated the implications of academia's silent gatekeeping. And then came the interviews. CNN, NPR, Al Jazeera, Wired, Science Daily. But the story that hit hardest was the one that led with the headline. The equation they tried to bury, and the girl who dug it back up. Halcroft tried to pivot. Again, they released a statement applauding Ava's dedication to academic excellence and her honorable effort to bring inclusion to the world of STEM. They offered to name a scholarship in her honor. She declined. Instead, she requested that the scholarship be renamed for Darnell Williams, and that his original thesis be restored in the university's archives. They didn't answer, but the public pressure mounted. Journalists flooded their inboxes. Alumni threatened to pull donations. Students demanded transparency.
Then another surprise.
A letter from the National Science Foundation arrived. Physically, in a gold-trimmed envelope. Eva opened it with trembling fingers. Her eyes scanned the page once, twice. She dropped to her knees. The equation, her equation, Darnell's equation, had been nominated for the Presidential Award for Early Career Scientists. Under her name,
Ava Delaney.
the citation read, for outstanding contributions to advanced probability theory, and for exposing the historical injustices embedded in scientific gatekeeping. She sent a photo of the letter to Darnell. He didn't reply right away. When he did, it was just a voice memo. I never thought I'd live to see our work recognized. Thank you for dragging it out of the grave. She played the message 5 times. The next morning, her inbox held an invitation to join the National Academy of Sciences Youth Innovation Council, and another one, from a nonprofit dedicated to Black STEM advocacy, offering her a seat on its board. Suddenly, the girl Halcroft had tried to erase was now being asked to shape the very future they once locked her out of. But Ava didn't forget. She returned to campus quietly, slipped into the math building, sat alone in the lab, where the chalkboard still stood, dusty and worn. She didn't write anything this time. She just stared at it, the place where silence had once been her only witness, until footsteps echoed behind her. It was Professor Lillian Ames, one of the few women in the department. She had never said a word during Ava's ordeal, had always passed with tight smiles and quick nods. Now she stopped beside her. I was in that room during your hearing, Ames said. Ava looked up. And you said nothing. I was scared, Ames replied. I saw what they did to Darnell. I saw what they did to your mother. Eva's breath caught. What? I was a TA when your mother gave her guest lecture. I remember her equation. I remember the way Halden dismissed her. I told her she lacked mathematical maturity. She left the building in tears. I wanted to reach out, but she stopped. But you didn't, Ava finished for her. Ames nodded, ashamed. Why tell me now? Ava asked. Ames swallowed. Because there's more. Because Halden didn't just bury your mother's work. He sent parts of it overseas, to a colleague in Germany. It showed up in a European journal, 5 years later, under someone else's name. Eva's jaw tightened. I have the paper, Ames said. If you're ready to see how far this goes. Ava followed her out of the lab, and as they reached Ames's office, she handed over the file. On the cover, Keller-Franz equation, 2007. Ava opened it and froze. Her mother's signature diagrams were inside, but someone else's name sat at the top. She didn't just demand acknowledgement, she changed how it's given. Recognition had always been transactional at Hallcroft. A closed system of awards, titles, and published footnotes. Brilliance didn't matter unless it came from the expected places, in the expected voices wearing the expected skin. Ava Delaney had not just broken their rules. She had rewritten them entirely. The Keller-Franz scandal cracked open something deeper. Once Ava exposed that her mother's foundational work had been stolen, traced back to European publications bearing foreign names on Black American formulas, the academic world could no longer plead ignorance. Professor Lillian Ames, once silent, now provided scanned documents, archived emails, and private notes proving a decades-long pattern of buried contributions. It hit hard, and it hit fast. Within a month, Ava's MIT presentation had triggered a national wave of inquiry. At Yale, a panel of students demanded a re-review of all historical academic misconduct cases involving Black students dating back to 19. At Stanford, 2 professors stepped down after it was revealed they had co-authored a paper based on the erased thesis of a former Ghanaian student. At Howard, a coalition of students launched a digital archive of lost Black academic contributions titled, The Brilliance They Buried. Ava didn't lead every protest. She didn't attend every panel, but her name was on every banner. The girl they once silenced had become the precedent. She didn't stop. When the National Mathematical Society offered her a spotlight in their spring edition, she accepted, but only if the byline included, dedicated to Darnell Williams and Regina Delaney. She gave interviews, but each time turned the spotlight to the work of those forgotten before her. She brought out Darnell's old notes, her mother's journals, even the faint pencil marks she once mimicked as a child on her kitchen table. Every appearance wasn't about Ava rising. It was about everyone they'd pushed down. Then came the Delaney Williams Foundation, a grassroots effort that exploded into a national scholarship fund within weeks. Its mission was simple: to locate, restore, and elevate underrepresented mathematicians whose work had been sidelined or stolen. Within months, dozens of students received fellowships, not because they checked diversity boxes, but because Ava had exposed how excellence had long been gatekept by a system dressed as meritocracy. She could have stopped there. She didn't. Her next campaign was bolder, riskier, and more personal. She launched a public petition titled, Rescind the Honors Built on Black Silence. It targeted Richard Halden. It demanded the revocation of his National Math Awards, the retraction of his co-authored papers linked to stolen work, and a full investigation into the publications that had benefited from the intellectual theft of Ava's mother and Darnell Williams. Hallcroft panicked. They released a prepared statement. While Professor Halden is no longer with us, his contributions remain significant to the field. We acknowledge concerns raised and are committed to transparency moving forward. It was an evasion. Ava responded by going louder. She posted excerpts of Darnell's thesis side by side with Halden's publications. She leaked excerpts of her mother's seminar notes from 2002. The same notes that later appeared, almost verbatim, in a paper attributed to Halden's European colleague. What began as an academic battle became a moral one. And then came the twist no one saw coming. An anonymous editorial appeared in the Atlantic Monthly, penned by a former faculty peer of Halden's. It was scathing, a detailed confession that for years, Halden had operated under a quiet privilege of extraction, mentoring young scholars of color, only to repurpose their innovations once they were out of the picture. The article named Darnell. It named Regina Delaney. And it ended with the line, "Genius doesn't always come from the spotlight. Sometimes it grows in the margins," and Halden made a career of harvesting it in the dark. The world noticed. A week later, the International Mathematical Review Board issued a formal statement of concern. One of Halden's earliest publications, a 1992 paper on algorithmic entropy, was flagged for re-examination. 3 days after that, one journal issued a retraction. It was the first time in Halden's long decorated career that a major academic journal openly questioned the originality of his work. And once one domino fell, others began to tremble. For Ava, the moment was complicated. She had imagined this moment for years, not specifically the retraction, but the acknowledgement, the validation that her mother had not been wrong, that Darnell had not been paranoid, that she herself had not imagined the way they tried to erase her. And yet when it came, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like justice, overdue, imperfect, but necessary. The foundation hosted a private ceremony that week. It wasn't about Ava, it was about Darnell. He wore a fitted navy blazer, his hands trembling slightly, as he stepped to the small stage in the modest auditorium. The lights were soft. The audience, mostly students, alumni, and community leaders, stood in quiet reverence. He was finally receiving an honorary doctorate from the very university that had once erased him. As he stepped up, Ava stood beside him. The moment felt surreal. Two timelines collapsing into one, the past and the present shaking hands. Darnell took the mic. "I spent more time hiding than healing," he began. "And I never thought I'd see the day when someone like Ava would kick the door down and drag my name out of the basement they locked it in." Laughter and applause followed. "But she didn't just bring my name back," he continued. "She changed the rules. She reminded us that being brilliant is not enough if the world refuses to call it brilliance." He turned to her then. "You gave me back something I stopped believing in. Memory." Ava wiped away a tear. Later, in a quiet hallway outside the ceremony, Darnell said something she wouldn't forget. "They always tried to make us grateful for what little they gave. But you made them account for what they took." She nodded. "That's the difference between access and ownership," she whispered. That night, Ava returned home to find an email from the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights. A new investigation was being opened into Hallcroft, Halden's research grants, and the misconduct linked to systemic bias in academic citation practices. It wasn't just a response, it was precedent. Ava logged off. She stared at the ceiling above her bed, flooded with a strange calm. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't waiting for permission. She was rewriting the terms. 3 days later, as Ava scrolled through an archive site, a new update appeared. Publishing retired, Halden et al., 2001, retraction pending ethics review. And below it, a comment thread with a flagged entry reading, "Who really wrote this? I think it started in a janitor's daughter's notebook. E'en in disgrace, some men choose pride over truth." By the time Halden finally resurfaced, his career was already ashes. 3 retractions, 6 formal inquiries, 2 ethics reviews, and a universal distancing from every institution that had once celebrated him created a silence thick enough to choke on. Hallcroft scrubbed his name from their website. Conferences removed him from their archives. A decade of laurels turned to dust overnight. Yet in the midst of his downfall, one network still wanted him. It was a small fringe media outlet, hungry for controversy, desperate for clicks, eager to weaponize the language of cancel culture for any disgraced figure willing to claim victimhood. They offered Halden a platform, a sympathetic interviewer, and the guarantee that he could tell his side without interruption. He accepted instantly. The interview aired at 8 p.m. on a chilly Friday night. Ava watched from her living room, her father beside her, his jaw tight, arms folded like steel bars across his chest. Darnell joined by phone, listening quietly from his modest apartment 2 states away. The segment opened with dramatic music, as if Halden's fall were a tragedy rather than a reckoning. When he appeared on screen, he looked smaller, thinner, but his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, were the same. The interviewer leaned in. "Professor Halden, thank you for joining us. How are you holding up?" Halden sighed dramatically. "It's been difficult. The past months have been a trial. I have been mischaracterized by the media, slandered online, and stripped of a career I dedicated my life to." Ava scoffed under her breath. The interviewer nodded in sympathy. "Do you feel you've been treated fairly?" "Fairly?" Halden repeated. "Absolutely not. My work spanning decades has been reduced to rumors, taken out of context, and judged by people who do not understand the rigor of academic mentorship." Ava caught the word immediately. "Mentorship," she muttered. "He's setting up the lie."
Marcus shook his head. Man still trying to sound noble.
The interviewer leaned in, voice soft. What about the allegations of misconduct, specifically involving students of color? The claims that you suppressed or stole their work? Halden didn't flinch. I believe, he said slowly, carefully, that we live in a time where excellence is often misinterpreted as exploitation. Yes, I worked with many students from diverse backgrounds. Yes, I provided oversight on many projects. But guidance is not theft. Oversight is not misconduct. Eva clenched her fists. There it was, the first crack. The interviewer pressed on, but the documents suggest otherwise. For instance, Darnell Williams. Halden cut her off with an irritated chuckle. Ah, yes, Mr. Williams, the narrative internet activist adore. Let me be clear, I oversaw his work. He was talented in a raw sort of way, but he lacked the discipline to complete a formal proof. He was volatile, inconsistent. I merely ensured that any promising direction he was exploring was properly developed. Darnell spoke through the phone speaker. Properly developed. He means he stole it. Marcus tightened his hand on Ava's shoulder. Holden continued. And as for Miss Delaney, Ava inhaled sharply. I never questioned her potential, only the integrity of her submission. To go from average assessments to a groundbreaking solution overnight, anyone would raise questions. If anything, I was trying to protect her. The board misinterpreted my intentions. Ava nearly laughed at the absurdity. The interviewer shifted. But the leaked audio, your own voice, indicated a bias. You said, and I quote, "We can't let another one of them take credit for this." Halden exhaled sharply. That statement was taken out of context. I meant that we must maintain academic standards. The them referred to unverified methods, unreviewed work. No. The interviewer interrupted. But the phrasing was unfortunate, Halden snapped. But I am not responsible for how others twist my words. Ava leaned back. He's slipping. The interviewer changed tactics. Given everything that has come out, the retractions, the testimonies, the internal memos, what do you say to those who believe your career was built on the silencing of black scholars? For the first time, Halden's carefully composed facade cracked. He sat up straighter, eyes narrowing. I say this, he began, his voice sharp. Brilliance must be curated, guided, directed. When students, especially those unfamiliar with the expectations of academia, produce work beyond their demonstrated capacity, it is my responsibility to question it. Ava felt the sting of his phrasing. Students unfamiliar with expectations, demonstrated capacity. He wasn't hiding the bias. He was polishing it. Halden pressed on. People forget that academia is not about feelings. It's about pedigree, precision, reliability. When I took on mentees, I shaped them. Some could handle it. Some couldn't. That is not racism. That is rigor. Darnell spoke through the phone. He just told on himself. The interviewer looked unsettled. But do you regret anything? Regret? Halden repeated, scoffing. I regret that the world has been trained to villainize excellence. I regret that personal narratives have overshadowed objective achievement. And I regret that I, a man who dedicated his life to truth, have been labeled a thief because society demands a villain. Silence hung. Then the interviewer asked the question that changed everything. Professor Halden, did you ever publish work that originated with your students? Specifically, did you ever use foundational concepts developed by Darnell Williams, without credit? Halden hesitated. A fraction of a second, but long enough. Finally he said, I oversaw his work. The interviewer blinked. Meaning? Halden exhaled slowly. Meaning I shaped it. Ava leaned forward. He continued. A mentor is entitled to interpret, refine and present ideas developed under his guidance. Intellectual development is not ownership. It is stewardship. If Mr. Williams lacked the structure to finalize his work, it is not unethical for a faculty member to ensure that promising contributions reach the academic world. Ava's breath caught. He had said it, not directly, but clearly. He admitted it. Eva whispered, he just confessed. Marcus nodded slowly. On camera, Darnell's voice shook through the phone. He actually said it. The interviewer didn't realize what she had been handed. But the internet did. Within minutes, the clip was posted. Within 10, it reached Twitter. Within 30, it hit national news. Headlines exploded across the web. Halden admits to shaping students' work. Ethics experts call it confession. Former professor claims ownership over erased scholars' contributions. Academic community demands full retraction of Halden's career. Universities scrambled. Harvard issued a carefully worded statement. We condemn any form of academic exploitation. Princeton clarified. Professor Haldon's work does not reflect our ethical standards. Even Hallcroft, the institution that once guarded him like a prized heirloom, released a cold, distant message. We were unaware of the extent of the misconduct. Ava read it and scoffed. They knew. They always knew. But now they didn't want blood on their marble steps. Yet the biggest blow came from a man none of them expected. The former president of Hallcroft University, Dr. Samuel Redmond, testifying under subpoena during the federal investigation into academic misconduct. A clip emerged hours later. Redmond sat stiffly, hands clasped, eyes weary but sharp. The lawyer asked, Dr. Redmond, were you aware that Professor Haldon had taken credit for student work? A long pause. Redmond swallowed. Then he said the words that collapsed the last of Haldon's legacy. We knew what Haldon did. We just thought no one would care. Eva froze. Marcus's hand slipped from her shoulder. Darnell's breath shattered through the speaker. A new headline appeared on Ava's screen. Moments later. Federal inquiry expands after former president's testimony. Hallcroft may face criminal liability. Her father once cleaned the floors. Now he watches her walk across them in triumph. The room was bigger than any classroom Ava Delaney had ever stepped into. And yet she didn't feel small. The National Science Hall shimmered in gold and marble. A monument to intellect. And for decades, a place where only certain names were remembered. But today, Ava's name wasn't a footnote. It was carved into the ceremony's headline. She had arrived in a simple, elegant black dress. No designer label, no stylist, just grace earned through survival. Cameras flashed as she entered, reporters whispering in hushed tones, not out of disrespect, but reverence. This wasn't the girl Hallcroft tried to expel. This was the woman America now celebrated. But as the band began playing the processional music and the stage lights warmed to brilliance, Ava's eyes weren't on the polished podium. They were on the man walking just behind her, Marcus Delaney. He wore his old janitor's uniform, ironed, cleaned and creased, as sharp as any suit in the room. His name tag caught the light. He could have worn anything. But he chose this. Not out of shame, but legacy. He took his seat in the front row, just beside the vice president and a circle of top physicists. Some nodded respectfully. Others looked confused. A few recognized him, not from academic circles, but from the viral interview he gave last month, describing how he used to sweep the very halls that once tried to erase his daughter. On the stage, a white-haired committee chair adjusted the mic. Ladies and gentlemen, it is with profound pride that we award the 2025 National Medal of Science to Ava Delaney for her contribution to advanced theoretical mathematics and for her advocacy for academic justice and inclusion. Applause thundered through the hall. Ava stepped forward. For a moment her feet felt unsteady, not out of fear but from the weight of what it meant to walk across that stage. Years of doubt, accusation, surveillance, hearing professors dissect her worth in closed rooms, watching her mother's work fade into silence, watching Darnell disappear. All of it led here. She accepted the medal, a circular silver piece etched with an abstract formula, one eerily similar to the problem she had solved. Then she turned to the mic. I wasn't supposed to be here, she began. The room stilled. I was born into brilliance, but not the kind people recognize. My mother saw patterns in chaos. My father saw dignity in silence. I solved a problem that scared people, not because of what it revealed, but because of who revealed it. Her voice didn't waver. For years, people like me have been told our work is too sudden, too lucky, too questionable. Our ideas get filtered through mentors, erased in drafts, and buried beneath names that history likes better. She glanced at her father. My father used to clean classrooms where professors refused to say my name. He mopped floors while students called me a fraud. Today he sits in the front row of a ceremony meant to keep people like us out. Marcus swallowed hard, eyes shining. So before I thank the institutions, or the journals or the foundations, Ava said, I want to thank him. She turned toward Marcus and gave the smallest, most devastatingly powerful bow, one that made the entire hall rise to its feet with her. They didn't clap, they stood in silence, not because they were asked to, but because they understood. After the ceremony, the media pivoted. For weeks, coverage had been focused on academic fraud, journal retractions, and Haldon's unraveling. But now, Eva's story found its heartbeat. From janitor's closet to national stage, The father-daughter legacy behind the equation. Marcus Delaney, America's most important custodian. How a mop handle in a math problem changed STEM forever. Photos of Marcus standing beside Ava in his uniform flooded the internet. Black fathers reposted it with captions like, "For my baby girl, I'd wear this too." Teachers printed the image and taped it to classroom doors. Students tagged Ava in videos of them solving math problems in hoodies and braids, saying, "If she could, so can I." In Detroit, a math teacher rewrote her lesson plans to include Ava's proof structure. In Chicago, a group of black female STEM majors launched a club called the Delaneys. In Georgia, a retired professor went viral confessing he once ignored a black student's thesis and now wanted to apologize. But it wasn't just national. International publications picked it up. Ava's methodology was translated into German, Korean, Swahili. A university in Lagos offered her an honorary visiting professorship. A mathematics society in Paris requested a lecture. But Ava stayed grounded, because the most important thing was still unfinished. Under public pressure, Holcroft announced a new scholarship. It wasn't named after Ava. It was named after Darnell Williams. The Williams Initiative for Mathematical Equity. Darnell didn't attend a press conference, but he sent Ava a voice note after. "You gave me back my name," he said. "They can keep the stage." Ava smiled as she played it back again. Then, just before leaving the post-ceremony banquet, one of the staff tapped her shoulder and handed her a white envelope. No return address, no postage, just her name. Handwritten. Ava stepped outside, the night air cool, crisp and silent. She opened the envelope and unfolded a single sheet of lined paper. The handwriting was tight, sharp, nervous. "Dear Ava, I saw your speech. I cried. I'm 13. I live in Alabama. I'm the janitor's kid at my school too. And I solved it. I don't know how, it just made sense. Like it sang to me. My teacher says I got lucky. But I know better now. I solved it. Just like you." No name. No signature. Just... Ava pressed the letter to her chest, blinking against the sting behind her eyes. She had rewritten the rules of recognition. But something even more powerful had happened now. She had cracked open permission. Back in her hotel room, Ava opened her inbox. A subject line caught her breath. "Your equation has inspired a pattern we've never seen before. Would you be willing to verify a second solution?" She didn't just solve an equation, she exposed a system. The return to Holcroft didn't come with banners or brass bands. No red carpet lined the entrance. No administrators stood outside with welcoming smiles. But as Ava Delaney stepped through the same arched doors she once entered in silence, everything and everyone around her seemed different. This time, no one looked through her. This time, they moved aside. The invitation hadn't come from the administration. Not officially, it had come from the students. The Black STEM Alliance, that now flourished on campus, born from the wreckage she once stood inside. They requested she deliver the university's annual legacy lecture, an event traditionally reserved for tenured faculty or Nobel laureates. The school tried to pivot, to frame it as a celebration of institutional growth, but Eva made it clear before agreeing. This isn't a celebration, it's a confrontation. And she kept her word. The auditorium was packed, rows of students, some wide-eyed with admiration, others skeptical, many holding notebooks or live streaming on phones. In the back stood a handful of faculty, older professors who remembered her not as a hero but as a disruption. Eva approached the podium in silence. No preamble, no projection of her accolades. Just her, a woman who had walked through fire and came back carrying water for others. She looked at the crowd, paused, then said, "I wasn't supposed to come back." The room went quiet. "I was supposed to be a footnote, a cautionary tale, a girl who flew too close to the sun and got burned for it." A flicker of discomfort moved through the crowd. She continued, "But what they didn't understand was this. I wasn't the only one. For every one of me that made it into your lectures, your labs, your student panels, 10 more were erased before the syllabus was printed." A murmur rippled through the audience. She clicked a remote. Behind her, a screen lit up with faces, not famous ones, but archived yearbook photos, student IDs, cropped black and white images, each labeled with names and brief bios, promising mathematicians, physicists, engineers, some expelled, some forced out, some never published, some simply gone. "These are the minds you never met," she said. Because their work was either taken or ignored. She clicked again. A timeline appeared. On it, red markers denoted every confirmed case of academic suppression against black students uncovered in the last 12 months. Holcroft's name appeared more than once. "This is not unique," Ava said. "This is systemic." Her voice tightened. "You built ivory towers on the backs of black brilliance, and then barred the very people who built them from entering the front door. No one clapped. No one dared. I stand here not to ask for your recognition," she added. "I don't need it. I brought my own. I brought the equations, the history, the evidence, and now." She clicked one last time. The infrastructure. The screen shifted again, this time to a sleek interface. The archive of buried brilliance. An open-source, public database containing recovered research, unpublished papers, thesis abstracts, and course submissions from underrepresented students across decades, vetted, scanned, and preserved. Created by Ava. Funded by the Delaney Williams Foundation. Supported by a growing coalition of scholars across the country. "I will no longer ask your institutions to make space for us," Ava said, voice steady now. "We are making space for ourselves. And we are documenting everything." A long pause, then her final words. "Black minds built this country. We're done being hidden in its basements." The silence held for several seconds before applause finally erupted. But Ava didn't stay to bask in it. She stepped back, nodded once, and turned to exit the stage. She passed the first few rows, locked eyes with a young girl in a Holcroft hoodie, her eyes red from crying. Another student held a printed version of Ava's original formula in their lap, tracing its lines like scripture. Just as she reached the exit, a hand reached out. It belonged to a white boy, maybe 16, maybe 17, his blazer too stiff, his hair still wet with nervous sweat. He looked terrified. But he said, "Miss Delaney, I wanted to give you something." Ava slowed. He held out a sheet of paper. No letterhead, just lined notebook paper covered in scribbled math, corrections, and a looping question mark at the bottom. "I've been working on this," he stammered. "They say no one's solved it yet. My teacher said it's impossible. I don't know if it's anything but..." Ava took it. She glanced at the formula, and paused. It was messy, but familiar. Not a copy of anything she'd seen, but something that curved around a principle she'd touched only once, in her mother's oldest notes. Her lip twitched upward. She knelt slightly, unfolded the paper against her palm, and said softly, "Do you mind if I take a look?" The boy nodded frantically. Without another word, Ava reached into her purse, pulled out a pen, and started writing. Lines curved beneath her hand like water finding its level. The student watched in stunned silence as Ava recalibrated a section, adjusted a variable, reoriented the theorem's entry point. She wasn't just solving. She was teaching. The hallway quieted. Around her, other students began drifting over, curious, awed, watching brilliance unfold, not behind a podium, not in a paper, but on a sheet of notebook paper, handed to her in faith. After a long minute, she handed the paper back to the boy. "I think you were closer than you realized." He blinked. "Really?" Ava nodded. "Keep going. Just don't let anyone tell you you're not supposed to." He smiled, wide and crooked, and raw. She turned to leave. As she walked down the corridor, past the same classrooms that once refused to acknowledge her, past portraits of deans who'd turned blind eyes, the whispers followed behind her. But this time they weren't whispers of suspicion. They were echoes of hope. In dorm rooms across campus, students stayed up late to read her archive. In universities across the country, professors reshaped their curriculum to include the names that had once been buried. In homes across America, Black parents showed their daughters videos of Ava's speech and said, "This is who you were allowed to be." She had done more than reclaim space. She had shifted the axis, not by yelling, not by breaking, but by proving line after line, name after name, fact after fact, that genius had never belonged to a single color, a single institution, or a single gatekeeper. And no amount of erasure could rewrite what had already been solved in ink. Back at her hotel, Ava checked her inbox. Dozens of new messages flooded in. But one subject line stopped her cold. "Are you ready to co-author your mother's last equation?" Some stories aren't just stories. They're warnings written in lived pain. If this one made you feel something, it means you're still human. Type yes if you believe erased voices deserve to be heard. Subscribe if this broke your heart and opened your eyes.